Or, there's several crafts mentioned there, and this gentleman here was mentioning the need for that crafts are dying out and having opportunities for elders to teach young people crafts. So who we choose, I mentioned this in the example from Armenia, who we choose is very important. The person who's going to interact with the traveler should be a tradition bearer. So tradition bearers are the people who carry on the cultural skills, knowledge, and artistic expressions learned from their families or communities. They are storytellers. So who could tell a story that answers these questions, that presents this culture to the traveler? Because choosing the right people for the experience is really what makes it work. So I want to ask the question here. Who in the audience considers themselves a tradition bearer? Raise your hand. Okay, tell me, what is it, what tradition?
Now I could tell something about pita making, the traditional dough.
Where did you learn it from?
From my mother.
From your mother, okay. Anyone else a tradition bearer?
Tradicija papučarskog zanata datira, što zapisano ima u dokumentima od 1822. godine u mojoj porodici. Znači od pradjeda, djeda, oca, pa sam naslijedio taj posao. Radio sam ga vrijedno 31 godinu, a sad sam umirovljenik. Još uvijek radim jer rad održava čovjeka. Mislim da je ugodno potrošiti vrijeme koje je čovjek u mirovini sa nečim što će mu biti i razonoda, a i donijeti mu nekakav profit. Tako da bi trebalo posvetiti pažnju, ne samo kod ovog što sam ja naveo za sebe, imate takvih niz zanata koji su na izumiranju. Imate jednog ili dva čovjeka još uvijek koji rade i kad kad ode 50% ih nema. Kad dva odu, zanat se ugasio. Ja ću vam reći, terzija je onaj koji je radio narodne nošnje vezao, nema ni jedan. Nema ni jedan. A danas bi bilo jako lijepo kad bi neko mogao da se obuče u narodnu nošnju i za neki svečani dan da nastupi u tome. Sad su jedini nosioci te tradicije kulturno-umjetnička društva, folklorna društva koja i se bave time i vrijedno čuvaju tu uniformu koju oni imaju. Jer teško je može ko napraviti, znate. Eto, toliko. Hvala vam.
It's a very important issue and one that's unfortunately very common around the world. Is there anyone else who sees themselves as a tradition bearer? So we have pita making that you learned from your mom. We have making slippers, which goes back many generations in your family.
Maybe I'm not the tradition holder, but our village has 12 shops, and every shop is fully packed and representing every traditional handcraft what we have, from blacksmith to copper maker to slipper maker and like handbag maker. So that will be maybe in the future. Nemam sedlara, nemam. I have a photographer, berber, and yeah. And it could be very, very good for all of us to present all of our traditional handcrafts and everything.
Yeah. Anyone else want to share? Anyone else a tradition bearer? Okay, tell us about what tradition you practice.
Hvala. Pa ne znam, evo sad mi na ovom pade, pošto radim u školi, toj poljoprivrednoj tehničkoj školi već više od 20 godina, nastojim, znači, kroz neke svoje predmete koje predajem, što više promovisati naše ove autohtone pasmine koje mislim da su jako zanemarane, a mnogo stvari se s njima može odraditi. Ili recimo na promociji recimo sadnji novih uvezenih sorti voća. Recimo mi imamo dosta autohtonih sorti, kruške, jabuke, šljive, gdje tradicijom, znači naši preci se bavili kakvim proizvodima. pa ima i pšenice i kukuruza i povrća i to tako, ali mislim koliko ja mogu kao jedinka prenosim to na djecu. Sad, naravno da uvijek treba pomoć i to ogromno od viših institucija, može umrežavanja i škole i rasadnika i starih ljudi koji se bave na svojim imanjima. Mislim da to treba više segmenata. Hvala.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
I will use Bosnian. Okay. Već ste svi čuli da se ja bavim proizvodnjom svijeća, ali to nije stvar koju bi ja htjela istaći kao našu tradicionalnu stvar, nego nešto što sam ja naučila od svoje nane, a to je pletenje i heklanje. Također to mi svi radimo, bez obzira na moju djelatnost, ali u ulici pored mene postoji žena koja je starija i koja ima cijelu radnju ručno rađenih pletenih stvari. Tako da je jedna od stvari koja nas čini specifičnim i to pletenje i heklanje.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the reason I wanted to ask that question is because a lot of times we have a narrow definition of who a tradition bearer is. And the reality is that many of us are tradition bearers. If you have a family recipe that your mom taught you or some other kind of practice, if we kind of went through the room, we don't have time to do this today, but I want to encourage you to think about this and to keep this in your mind when you go home tonight, is think about what is it that makes you who you are and the things that you learn about food or music or tastes that you have and preferences of how you decorate your home or things that you might make or hobbies that you might have. The reality is that there's a lot of knowledge that gets passed down in families or through communities, and so many more of us are tradition bearers than you might think. And so I wanted to bring this up because it's important to have an expansive definition of who a tradition bearer is, because it helps you to step away, realizing, yes, definitely, there are craft practices that have been passed down for generations and generations and generations, and those are very strong tradition bearers. But people also who have restaurants and are making recipes and are preparing food, they may not think of themselves in the same way. And oftentimes when we're making our festival program as an example, that people, like I said before we went to lunch, it's only when somebody from outside recognizes something that you're doing that you start to think, oh, that is, I learned how to make pickles from my grandma. And it's not something someone else knows, and it's very specific to a place. So when we're talking about tradition bearers, it's the people who have that specific knowledge. So when you're thinking about who it is that's going to present cultural heritage to the traveler, it's important to take some things into consideration. For example, are they already doing something to share the practice? When we were looking for tourism experiences in Armenia, I gave you the example of the women working with wool, and they were already doing this work. Again, they didn't necessarily learn the practice from their parents, but they were relearning how to weave, how to comb wool, how to spin wool into yarn. So these ladies were already doing this, and so it actually became a really important way to kind of give them another platform. So are they engaged in other means of practicing and sustaining the practice? Are they teaching? Are they doing advocacy? You're doing advocacy. We were just talking about this before. Do they do performances? Are they otherwise engaging with the public or exhibiting leadership qualities in some way? It's these types of people, the combination of having a heritage practice and also being a leader and a teacher. It makes people really, really good as hosts for experiences. And then you also want to think about the bigger themes of what it is that you want to communicate and how that person contributes to telling that bigger story. You could look for people that present a distinct or surprising perspective. One example that we have is stone carvers. In Armenia, traditionally, the stone carvers are all men. But we found a woman who was doing stone carving. And it was really cool to give her an opportunity because people had this idea in their mind that this is just a man's practice. And so by giving her the opportunity to present her craft and her practice and her story, it offered a way for us to say something different about gender roles in society and how things are changing. And so think too about those kinds of opportunities. Could you create an opportunity for someone to present something that challenges stereotypes or shows how things are changing? You also want to make sure that the person that's presenting the heritage to the public is comfortable engaging with a variety of audiences. This is extremely important. When we're choosing people for our festival, they're going to come into contact with a lot of people, and they have to feel comfortable speaking to them and being broadly just kind of, we teach basically like a lot about ethics as well, of like treating people with equality and being able to engage with them and be comfortable with them. So you want somebody who's really kind of, it doesn't matter if they speak English, it makes no difference, but you kind of know when you meet somebody and they're passionate about their culture, there's like some of you have it, I've seen it. It's like an extra energy, passion, excitement, they come alive. It's not a boring presentation. Like you can tell that no matter what happens, they're going to keep doing their craft or performing their music or their dance or cooking because it's part of their soul. It's part of who they are. And so you can see that when a person is presenting. And those are the types of people that you want to present to tourists. Because even if they're not speaking the same language, they're communicating through everything. It's like you can see it and feel it. And it's much more engaging and interesting for people. So one of the things that the approaches that we use in our project in Armenia that I think is transformational is working with researchers and really bringing this concept and bringing research into the development of the tourism experience. So we engaged the Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography in Armenia. And what it enabled us to do is so let's say we're creating an experience and we have a cook. The Under the Walnut Tree is a perfect example Simon gave earlier. What's the lady's name? Do you remember? Let's call her Naira just for fun, because I can't remember her first name either. So we'll say Naira. So Naira is a cook already, and she makes gata, that traditional cake, right? What we did on the project is obviously Naira knows her own family's history. She knows the region where she's from. She knows about the landscape, about where they're getting the ingredients. She knows how she learned how to make the ingredients. But what we actually did is we had a researcher who is very, very knowledgeable in Armenian foodways. She knows the history, the context. She's done her whole career of researching Armenian food. We gave the opportunity, her name's Ruzana, so we had Ruzana and Naira sit down together. And Naira told her, okay, I'm going to invite tourists in, we're going to make gata, we're going to do this. What Ruzana did is then she drew from her own knowledge of food to help Naira to deepen the presentation. And really what happened there is Naira was able to move from seeing herself as like, I'm going to engage with tourists, to realizing that she's doing something very important. That if she stopped making gata, that she would be cutting off a very important part of cultural heritage. So she started to see herself in the lineage of all the people before her who were making this particular food that's so important to Armenia. It gave her extra pride, extra confidence, and also extra knowledge about where she fits in the bigger picture of Armenian food and culture. And so it makes her a better presenter to the tourists when she's having this conversation. But the other piece of it is that it makes her a better leader. It makes her someone who's extra committed to her cultural heritage. So it's not just about presenting it to tourists, but it's strengthening Armenian food in general because she's become an advocate for it. So working with researchers can be a really, really strong way to uncover new aspects, connections, histories that are going to deepen the cultural heritage experience, but also help the person that's presenting it to really have all the extra information. And again, it adds, like I said before, the person, it's coming from their soul. So when they have the chance to learn, it just makes it even more meaningful when that person is presenting the experience. So by doing this kind of work, it also ensures that you're not violating kind of ethics issues, because a researcher has in mind those issues that we were talking about before of cultural appropriation, of over-commodification, and they can raise the flag on like, this seems like it might be destructive. So they can be really good advisors for avoiding that kind of practice. Is it not working? Man, okay, I've been electrocuted 5 times today. So the good news is that it's excellent if you have the ability to work with researchers, but if you don't, there's also the practice of self-research. And this is something that's very important to do. So tradition bearers can conduct research into your own practice. So if you're making candles and you want to add to the context of it, you can do your own research. You can go to museums, you can talk to other people, look at books, ask other people, and interview people. And the idea is for you to just deepen your knowledge of your own practice and its situation in the broader cultural heritage of the country. So when we asked tradition bearers that we worked with in Armenia about this experience, they said that by engaging with research and conducting their own research, it helped them to better understand and share new details. And it also makes them realize how valuable their work is and what they're doing. So ultimately, it helps us to create distinctive experiences. Again, that piece where you're not going and seeing the same thing all over the country. It's going to make them more interesting and more attractive for visitors, which obviously is then going to result in more revenue because more people are going to want to come and experience that. And so as I mentioned before, this whole process also serves to protect cultural heritage. So it's a very important means of safeguarding that goes beyond the economic piece into protecting cultural heritage that might be in danger. So I want to give you an example.
Ամենանոր կավն աշխատում, քնիկ ճանապարհ Բանին հիմա ինչ-որ մենք ստեղծում ենք, երկու հոգու մի ծնունդ է։ Մեր երեխաները ծնվել են կավաձեռքների։ Չորեք թաթանելով եկել են խառնվել հետերներս, նույնիսկ գրտնակել, զարդարել։ Հիմա ինձ հետ հավասա իրենք զարդեր են պատրաստում, չարխով, պապային են օգնում, ամեն ինչ անում, շատ սիրում են։ Դարքինն է, որ երբ գործոց սիրում ես, նյութը սիրում ես, արածը սիրում ես, այն ամեն ինչ որ անում ես, սիրում ես, այդ քեզ ուժ է տալիս։ Երբ որ մարդ իր սրտով անդրում, այն ինչ որ ուզում է ինքը դառնա, ինքը ամեն ինչ կանի, ոչ մի բանի առաջ կանգ չի առնի հասնելու համար իր ուզած նպատակի։
Okay, so I love that video because it gives you all the things we've been talking about, right? It has a tradition that they're practicing. You can see their kids are already getting involved. It's a family practice. They're talking about the passion, the materials, the knowledge. You even saw Vahag doing self-research. He's using books, looking at historical pottery and using that for inspiration in his products and sharing information about the motifs and the ornaments with the audiences that come in. So we made that little film as a documentation of the work that they do. But then we also, and I'm not sure if this one is it's in English. Do you need to find this one, or this one's in English? It's okay? So then what I want to show you now is after some time, again, they were making crafts and just selling them at festivals. And so what we did is we helped them take that into a concept where they brought tourists into their pottery workshop to get their hands dirty, to learn all about the traditions, the motifs, and to actually immerse themselves in making pottery. They then expanded into food. So now it's the same family, but they added a little restaurant area where you learn to make and also taste and learn a lot about food. So this is a little video that's more of a promotional video about the cooking experience there. Were you going to add anything? No? Good? Okay. So it's showing some of the other things you do in Sisyan, in the region. You learn to throw pottery as part of the experience. So these are real tourists now. And then you learn how to cook a feast with Zara. So she's teaching you all about from their village. And you're using the clay dishes that they make to make the food.
Oh, thank you. We just ate.
Right? I know everyone's full, but it's so tasty. But look, this is cool. They cook it in the pottery kiln. They make the food and they cook it in the kiln. So eat like locals do. So they're showing you exactly how you eat the food, the toasting. Yeah, of course. Here, let me bring you the microphone.
Who is making these promotions? Oh, sorry. Is this video is like, this is all made with you, yeah, with you. Do they have their own, like, Armenian, but no, but Armenian culture, state, the country, is it supporting them a lot?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because we were talking about marketing earlier. Armenia is, they have a lot of issues in the government, and so they don't have a lot of resources. Their tourism budget is very, very small. And so for our project, we actually used some of the funding from, this was also a USAID funded project, and as part of our marketing component, we worked with individual experiences to help them to develop their experiences. And as they went through our program, we hired local filmmakers to actually do the promotional videos as part of our project. I will say that this is one of the things that in the project is very difficult. When you have resources coming in from a donor, we were able to pay for all of these things. So there isn't an organization at the moment carrying on. I will say there's one Armenia is now doing experiential. So after our project closed, there was a private sector, or they knew there was going to be a gap because we were doing all of this development. So they actually came in as private sector, and they're now starting to work with businesses and help them, and they do filmmaking and stuff like that. But it's not, there isn't an agency or an organization. This is the type of thing that if you have a well-developed DMO, that there could be that kind of support, because we also made regional videos. But this is also something that as an individual experience, you could look at examples like this for making a film. Like, it doesn't have to be, it wasn't actually that costly to do this. It was a few $100s for the filmmaker to do each one. So you could do it on your own. And it's great to do it on your own, because these are assets that you can then give to market your experience to tour, and that because they can use that then, right, with their audiences. Question?
Probably more of a suggestion. Mr. Salihovic will remember that we did crafts videos, and I can show to you guys later, some 10 years ago. The issue is really this gap that happens after the project. So in your discussion, I'm not going to go into more detail right now, but in your discussion tomorrow, maybe if there is a way to pay attention to that part, specifically how cultural and heritage carriers and businesses can work together to create a vehicle without the government support, because we have done some of this stuff that you're talking about quite some time ago, and I'm not saying that it doesn't need to be done again, but it is just hanging up in the air because there is no vehicle to carry it beyond the project.
And I'll add to that we've been talking with the project, and I know that Turizam there's a responsibility over the life of the project to create new tourism experiences. So this training is the first step, but I know that you'll hear a lot more from the project about the different aspects of support for further concept development. So you're doing kind of the first stage in that. I know that the hopes and the goals of the project are to do this kind of development also here in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So let me think for a second. Anything that I missed in that last section on the... Because we're bringing it back to what we're doing on the wall here, talking about tradition bearers. The idea and why I wanted to share that with you is because we can come up with all the ideas in the world of what we could present, but in order to be able to do it, we have to really understand who it is that's actually going to be doing these things. And so there are different ways of developing this. In some cases, like with our project in Armenia for Vahag and Zara, they became the hosts. It's their business. Sicyon Ceramics is their business, and tourism experiences are one thing that they offer. And now they have they have like 3 or 4 different tourism products that they offer. In addition, they have their business. So they sell pottery, and then they also have the educational piece of what they do. But they're the tradition bearers, and they're also the business. There are also examples where maybe if you are a tour company and you're not the agent, but you're helping, because sometimes tradition bearers Vahag and Zara are pretty good at business, right? But not every tradition bearer is good at business. So if you're not a tradition bearer and you're an entrepreneur who wants to bring tourists together, then it's different. You have to create a partnership and collaborate. And then you're supporting these tradition bearers to get to the market. So there's different ways that you kind of, in the tourism sector, can engage. Yeah. Did you want to add something?
Just it kind of lines into this. You mentioned essentially the crux of it, which is, okay, you create these experiences, now how do you actually get them to the point where they're connected to market and ultimately how they're making money? And there's a number of different channels there, with projects like this one and like the My Armenia program. I'll move out of the light. We can kind of kickstart some of that. There's promotional efforts that some of this will feed into. There's kind of activities, but it has a lifetime. There's projects are cyclical in their way. But a lot of these experiences, there's different channels, and we'll get into this a little bit more kind of at the end of tomorrow. But there's different channels to distribute that information and connect with markets. But a critical part is making a good first impression. So these videos and other things is showing, teasing the visitor of what you can do. And then the channels for that can be, obviously, if you have a national tourism board or others, like that's one. I know, in Armenia, that was the budget they had was pretty limited. Here, I believe that's kind of the same case. It's the kind of limited outreach that's going on. Another, if you're an individual business, is obviously the tour operators and the agents that are actually then connecting to international markets. But we'll get into some of this tomorrow, so not to kind of belabor it. But there's different ways of essentially taking assets like this, and in terms of the videos and the products and the experiences that are created, and then using different channels to connect to those markets. So we will get into that a bit, but it's critical because ultimately that's the reason we're doing this, right?
I want to show this.
Oh yeah, one more.
Yeah, before we break for coffee, I want to show you one more video, because the interesting thing about this is, so that was Vahag and Zara, and they started working early in the project. They were some of our first partners that we worked with. And then as time went on, Vahag's brother and his dad also got into the tourism business because they had a family piece of property that was on a river, and they just used it for like vacation, but they were like, it's beautiful, let's create something. And so again, they looked at, again, working with a researcher, trying to think of like what's unique about this experience. And so they developed Wild Gastro. So I'll show you that one too. And these ones don't have a lot of language, they're more promotional, so. Same kind of format. So again, you have a monument. It's a beautiful monument that you go see, and then you go to their place, to their family place. And I also want to show you this just to give you ideas of like what is here in Bosnia and Herzegovina that could be similar. They go pick the vegetables from the greenhouse. They learn about them, they're talking about them. They pick and taste the asparagus. They go fishing in the fishing ponds. And then they're cooking together. And they're cooking it inside the tree bark, so it's a very traditional practice, not something you would do. It's really nice. I went there in September. I got to eat at that table. It's really a nice experience. It's beautiful. Eating it with the traditional bread and eating with the family. So I think this one is also, it's good food. It's food that's like from, one of the things that we wanted to convey is that when tourists were coming to Armenia before, and we experienced this when Simon and I first went for 2 weeks, we traveled all over the country, everywhere we went, we had dolma and horovats. It's dolma and then like a pork barbecue, and it's the same thing. And the first time you eat it, you're like, ooh, this is delicious. And then the 5th day, you're eating the same meal and you're like, can I go home now? I want like a pizza or something like that. And so what we did with the way of, again, think about this and where, and as we're traveling and doing these workshops around Bosnia and Herzegovina, we want to make sure that if people come here, when it comes to gastronomy and cultural heritage, it's rooted in the earth, in the environment, in the plants. And so if you're thinking about doing gastronomy experiences, really looking at those local ingredients, the history of where these recipes came from, and doing something that's really, really tied to the sense of place. So then as visitors are going throughout the country, they're eating, but they're also like experiencing things that are completely distinct as they're traveling. And sharing the stories in the process and engagement and work and being with people as a part of that. So we're gonna take a break for coffee, but the other thing that I wanna ask you to do is we've gone a little bit deeper in thinking about who's presenting the experiences. And so if there's anything else that you're thinking of that you might have missed or maybe something that came to mind, please feel free to add it. And when we come back, Simon's gonna take us in starting the process of ideation, which is the first step in product development. So we've got about 30 minutes for coffee. Let's do 20 so we can stay, because we're a little bit behind schedule and we wanna make sure you come back at 3 o'clock. Yeah.
All examples you showed was for small scale, for one group of people. Do you have some success story with a lot of people involved, like bigger organization? Because this is all four groups for 5, 6 maybe people, and everything involves just the host and the group. Do you have any example of which organized business with big groups, with more people working and stuff like that?
Yeah. So we're looking at examples where you're hosting like a bus of people coming, bus or two of people.
Yeah, I mean, again, for the My Armenia program, one example, it's not exactly aligned with what you guys do, but would be the wineries we worked with. So, yeah, and they actually varied even in themselves, because some of them were small and smaller entities, but some of them were pretty big operations that, were targeted essentially to a busload or two to come in. And it varied a little bit as well, because we worked with a number of wineries. Some were already pretty much established as a tourism experience, and the critical part there, or the interest from their side was, okay, we have people coming, but it's for a limited amount of time. Yeah, they're doing these certain things, but how do we kind of expand that and come up with some new ideas about how to engage people for longer and doing more? And in one or two, there was also essentially a pretty big operation, but they were just getting started. So it was a bit of different places where they're at. But yes, we worked with some that were more targeted to that kind of larger group activity. And there it was taking what was probably a more classic wine tour. You know, you come in, you kind of see the operation, taste, and that was kind of about it, to expanding that to, I mean, they did hikes up into the mountains, they did ATVs or four-wheelers, they put something in for that, and they tied it in, so we had one of these small experiences that would come and do basket weaving at the winery as well. So it kind of tied in with other businesses, but they were the kind of central host for hub, for a lot of these different things that were happening. Some of them themselves, and some of them were other people kind of bringing it in.
And that's the one thing I want to add to that, is that even for Sicyon Ceramics, they can host bigger groups because they have 3 different experiences that they're offering. One is cooking, one is pottery, and the other is making the scarves, hand painting the scarves. And there's also a hiking excursion nearby that you can do. So when they have a bigger group, they divide them into smaller groups, and then they can rotate. So they're there for a couple of hours, and like one group is cooking while the other one's making the pottery, and then you kind of split it that way.
Did they have a problem with other group leaders not being so passionate like the owners did? Like
you mean the travel agency that's bringing
the
them?
workers in their facility. Did they have a problem with that?
Yeah,
not to be so motivated and not to be so passionate like
no,
the owners did?
I mean, this particular group, everyone that works for them feels the same. But the question that he's asking is a very good one, because as your business grows, this is where cultural heritage tourism also goes into that realm of being commercialized and being like not having that kind of deep quality experience. And so that's really about human resources. So it's about if it's going to be an experience where you have a lot of people coming in, then the qualities that I was talking about with the tradition bearer and the person doing the demonstrating, you have to look for those same qualities in the other people that are coming. And so I'll give you an example. If somebody's a stone carver and they have that passion and that charisma and all of that, but there's a big group of 20 people coming, then you need handlers also, which that could be a role for local guides to come in and help crowd control, but to also be the same, again, that same type of person that really cares deeply and is going to share that same type of knowledge and help manage the crowd. So it becomes a human resources.
And part of what we did in the My Armenia program for entities like that winery and others was a kind of complementary storytelling and guiding piece, which essentially strengthened those type of individuals who were the interpreters, the hosts, the additional staff that kind of managed the tourists, the visitors, and help them to develop their skills in that kind of interpretation, storytelling, guiding approach. And I mean, they were, the businesses selected them, they were kind of passionate about trying to do it, but we just gave them the kind of base skills and knowledge. And that base narrative as well. And we'll talk a bit about this. We'll start tomorrow with storytelling and some of these pieces. It will be fairly kind of high level just because we're not getting deep into it. But yeah, that is a pretty critical part, because as soon as it goes beyond that tradition bearer, then it's helping someone to kind of interpret that, manage the visitors, be more of a host is a part of that. So we kind of had that parallel piece.
Sorry. We have a lot of tour guides, but there are city tour guides actually, and also hikers. Sorry. But who will present our culture, like old handcrafts, rural tourism. It's a little bit tricky, Mainly people not mainly, but a lot of older people from villages, they are not speaking English, so you need to get like an English-speaking person from the city, but maybe she or he doesn't know anything about rural tourism or something that we are offering, so it's a little bit tricky.
I think this is a good one for us whenever we're doing these workshops, I'm always making a laundry list for the project team for future trainings and things like that, because I think that's identifying a really critical piece that's not necessarily your responsibility, but is more about the ecosystem of tourism. Because we were just talking last night with Mr. Osta about the project and about the role of storytelling and how important it is. It's not just for the hosts themselves, but that there are other people coming into contact with the tourists that have to also be the storytellers and how to build those skills.
Yeah. So we did, in the My Armenia program, we had a kind of parallel piece that addressed that. But we're going to break for coffee. If everyone can come back at
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock for...
It's like 20 minutes.
We're going to start on concept development. So those pieces of paper you have, we're going to start diving into what are your thoughts and what are your ideas. And then tomorrow is when we'll really get that into the detail.